In the summer of 1923, a member of an American expedition picked up a gray object a little longer than his hand at the red cliffs of the Mongolian Gobi. It was a dinosaur egg, the first one science ever identified. And until that day, nobody knew for certain whether dinosaurs laid eggs at all. At the other end of that same desert, ice sits on the floor of a canyon into July, while the air above it holds at 113 degrees. One desert, and in 1971, 2 dinosaurs came out of this ground, killed in the middle of a fight, and left in the sandstone exactly as the event caught them. The claw sits in the throat. The prey's beak clamps the predator's forelimb. The pose has not shifted in 80 million years. We will finish at a place outsiders have not been led into for almost 800 years, where Mongolian law still limits any search. The reason is not conservation. You are sure you know how a desert works, aren't you? Heat, dry air, and sand? No ice within 1,000 miles? You almost certainly believe something else too. That the map of the Earth was finished long ago, and that nothing is left on it where a person is simply not allowed to go. And a third thing. You probably assume the past has already been sorted into museums, described and labeled, and that scientists are left refining somebody else's work? That the big finds were made in the 19th century, and what happens now is quiet desk work on details. Hold those 3 certainties. The Gobi takes them apart one at a time, calmly and without hurry, and it does this in a single way. It simply shows you what is lying under your feet. We start with the simplest one, with the weather. The Gobi covers roughly 500,000 square miles. That is about 2.5 times the size of France, stretched from southern Mongolia into northern China. Winter drops to 40 below.
Summer climbs to 113 Fahrenheit, 45 Celsius. The same stone passes through a swing of more than 150 degrees in half a year, and in the end it cracks and crumbles into gravel. Snow on dunes is normal here. It lands in a thin layer over the sand crests, holds for weeks, and leaves almost without meltwater. The air is so dry that ice evaporates straight out of the solid state. Camels rake it aside with a hoof to reach dry grass. Footage of snow-covered dunes starts an argument about editing every time. The reason is altitude. The floor of the Gobi lies about 3,000 feet above sea level, higher in places. That is the mark where ski lifts already run in the Alps. The desert sits on a plateau squeezed between mountain ranges, and cold air out of Siberia walks in freely, without meeting a single barrier on the way. Now the part that finishes it. Sand covers a small share of the surface here, by various estimates around 3%. The rest is gravel, clay flats and bare rock polished by wind until it shines. The Mongolian word Gobi means a place without water, and nothing about dunes is built into the name. The desert you were picturing takes up 3/100ths of the one we are driving across, and the other 97% looks like an endless, stony plain. On ground like that, a boot squeaks and slides as if on broken glass. At 40 below in dry air, the cold does not burn skin right away, but metal sticks to fingers, and your breath freezes in the air and falls onto your collar as fine grit. Sound carries a long way here. A car engine is audible 3 miles off, which is one reason the animals here are almost impossible to catch off guard. In spring, the desert flies. Wind tears fine dust off the clay flats and carries it east as a solid yellow wall. That dust reaches Beijing, Korea, and Japan, and in some years it is found over the Pacific, thousands of miles from where it lay.
Visibility in a storm like that falls to a few dozen yards. Dust grinds between your teeth, packs under your eyelids, and settles on your tongue with the dry taste of clay. And cars run the highway with their headlights on at noon. In 1975, part of this territory was closed off as the Great Gobi Reserve. More than 20,000 square miles, an area larger than Denmark. And inside it, there is not one permanent settlement and not one power line. Nobody lives there. We will come back to this place because an animal lives there that exists nowhere else on the planet. But first, water. Ice, to be exact. Somewhere in all that baked stone, there is a canyon where ice survives the whole summer, and finding it on a satellite map is almost impossible. From above, you see only a dark crack in the mountains. It is called Yolin Am, and it lies in the Gobi Altai, in the Girvan-Saikan range. The canyon opens as a wide valley, and the first half hour of the walk gives nothing away. Then the walls close in. At the narrowest point, 6 to 10 feet remain between the cliffs, and the walls themselves rise to the height of a 60-story building. Sunlight almost never reaches the bottom. The narrow slot works as a trap for cold air. Heavy, freezing air drains down the slopes and stays on the floor because it has nowhere to climb back to. In winter, the stream at the bottom freezes solid. The ice builds in layers, reaches several feet in thickness, and runs along the floor for hundreds of yards as one continuous field. Up top in summer, it is 104 degrees and scorched gravel. You walk down the trail, come around a bend, and the temperature drops close to 40 degrees in a few steps. It smells of wet stone. Water hums under your feet, running beneath the ice shell and coming out somewhere further down, and a draft pulls between the walls hard enough that you zip your jacket on the way up toward a July noon. The walk to the ice itself is about 1.25 miles. The trail follows the stream. Scree slopes rise on both sides, and there is always something alive on that scree. Pikas the size of your palm whistle from under the rocks and drop into their burrows a second before you can focus on them. Higher up, on a nearly vertical wall, Siberian ibex stand and look down. Their ledges are a hand wide. The name of the canyon means the mouth of the lammergeier. The lammergeier is a large mountain scavenger, and its wingspan reaches 10 feet, which is a normal ceiling height laid sideways across a narrow slot in the rock. The birds nest in these walls and circle above the canyon, barely moving a wing. From below, they look like specks. In the early 90s, in 93 to be exact, a national park was created around the canyon, Gobi Girvan-Saikan. On paper, the ice is protected. In practice, it is leaving. The field used to hold year-round and survive the whole summer, and now, in some years, it is gone by August, sometimes by the end of July. The thickness falls season by season. A place that promised you a glacier in the middle of a desert is melting faster than the guidebooks change. There is one more object in the Gobi that stands still and moves at the same time. It lies 125 miles from here. It has no water, no shade, and no fixed shape, and you hear it before you see it. It hums by itself. Kongoren els. A sand ridge more than 60 miles long, up to 6 miles wide in places, with crests that rise 1,000 feet. 1,000 feet is nearly the Eiffel Tower, set down on sand and stretched out along a mountain range. The climb takes a fit person about an hour, because the sand runs out from under the foot, and half of every step comes back down the slope with you. The ridge stands like a wall. A river comes up to it from the north, a green strip runs along the bed, camels graze there, and yurts stand on the grass. The distance from water to the foot of the dune is less than half a mile in places. You stand on grass, lift your head, and see a sand crest as tall as a skyscraper, and behind it there is no water, no green, and no road for 100 miles. And then the ridge starts to sound. When sand on a steep face breaks loose in a sheet, the dune gives out a low hum. Not a whistle, not a rustle. A steady tone that holds for tens of seconds and carries for miles. The frequency of singing dunes usually sits near 100 hertz, the range of the lowest notes of a man's voice, and the sound comes from below, out of the ground, and lands in your chest like a plane passing far away. This hum frightened people long before physicists took it up. Caravan drivers crossing the sands heard a low rumble out of nowhere and explained it as the voices of spirits that, in their telling, lived in the dunes and led stragglers away from the track. The logic held. The source is invisible. There may be no wind at all, and the whole valley hums at once. Losing your bearings is easy. For a long time, the sound was blamed on wind. In 2006, a group of physicists led by Stéphane Douady published a paper in Physical Review Letters, and the explanation turned out to be different. The source is the sand. As the avalanche runs, the top layer of grains starts moving in step. Thousands of particles synchronize their collisions, and a 1,000-foot slope works as one large loudspeaker. That leads to a condition nobody usually mentions. A dune sings only dry. Rain, fog, or simply a humid night is enough, and the sound disappears for a day, because a film of water between the grains kills the synchronization. Grain size matters too, and the grains have to be well-rounded. Only a few dozen singing dunes are known on Earth, and Kongorin Els is one of them. We said the map of the Earth was finished long ago. A ridge 1,000 feet high that produces a sound audible for miles came into the field of view of physicists only in the 21st century. Before that, people just listened. Here, it is worth changing scale. From 1,000-foot crests and a sound that covers a whole valley, we move to the number 40. That is how many individuals are left of one species, and all of them live in the protected zone we mentioned a few minutes ago. The Gobi bear, Mazalai in Mongolian, is the only bear on the planet that lives in a desert, year-round, without leaving it. Specialists in the Great Gobi Reserve estimate about 40 are left.
40 animals is fewer than the passengers on one city bus, and that bus holds the entire world population of the species. The Mazalai is small. It weighs around 200 pounds, 3 times lighter than an ordinary brown bear, and its coat is bleached out, light rust, almost the color of the gravel. It hardly eats meat. Its diet is roots, shoots, and wild rhubarb growing by rare springs. Only a handful of those springs are known in its part of the desert, and the bear walks the distance between them across baking flats where the ground passes 140 degrees by day. Reserve staff put out supplementary food at the springs in winter and early spring, when there is no vegetation in the desert at all, and the animal has no fat left after hibernation. The bear itself is rarely seen. The work is done through tracks on the salt crust, hair on bushes, and automatic cameras. A paw print in salt holds for weeks because the rain that would wash it away may not come all season. There is a second case in the same desert, stranger still. Przewalski's horse is the only species of wild horse that vanished from nature completely and was brought back out of zoos. In the late 60s, the wild horse was seen in the Gobi for the last time. Nobody saw it again. The species went on existing only behind fences, and every Przewalski's horse alive now descends from roughly 15 animals that made it through the 20th century in European zoos. In the early 90s, they started bringing them back. The first were released at Kristein Nuru, and later a group was taken to Takin Tal, inside the Gobi Reserve. The horses walked out of their enclosures into a steppe that neither they, nor their parents, nor their parents' parents had ever seen. They learned it from scratch. And here the detail comes out that made all of this work worth doing. Przewalski's horse was never domestic and never went feral. It has 66 chromosomes against 64 in a domestic horse.
It stays wild. You cannot ride it, you cannot harness it, and it does not tame even when raised in captivity. American Mustangs are descendants of escaped domestic horses, and what came back to this steppe is a genuinely wild animal that people once crossed off the list. Every mausolei and every horse in this desert is counted one by one, and each animal has a number, an observation card, and a dot on a map. A few hundred miles to the north stand thousands of objects with nothing whatsoever recorded about the people who made them. No name, no language. They are called deer stones. These are stone slabs up to 13 feet tall, set upright, with dressed faces and covered in carving. More than 1,000 are known across Mongolia, and they were raised in the Bronze Age, about 3,000 years ago, when pharaohs still ruled in Egypt. The carving on them is uniform and very recognizable. Deer run in a file up the slab, stretched out in mid-leap, antlers thrown back, the muzzle turning into a bird's beak, as if the carver joined an animal and a bird in one creature on purpose. The animals fly in a spiral from bottom to top. Below, there is often a belt, a dagger, and a mirror. Above, a line of a necklace. The slab reads as a person. Who raised them has not been established. Nobody signed them. These people had no writing. Settlements are almost never found nearby, and the carving itself cannot be dated directly. The methods that give the age of organic material do not apply to stone. Some researchers allow that the flying deer showed the passage of the dead into another world, but there is nothing to confirm it. Not one text, not one explanation from the makers themselves. In 2023, these monuments went onto the UNESCO World Heritage List. Stone mounds usually lie beside the slabs, and in Mongolia they are called kiriksurs. These are round or square stone spreads, sometimes 150 feet across, with a fence around the edge and a chain of small cairns outside it. In those cairns, archaeologists find heads and hooves of horses, laid facing east. The count runs into hundreds. What the rite meant cannot be said. No description of it survives among any people of the region. The stones have stood in the open for 3,000 years. Granite on the south side heats up in summer to the point where holding a palm on it is unpleasant, and on the north side it stays cold even in the heat. Your hand feels the difference. Wind and sand have worn part of the outlines down to barely visible lines, and on many slabs the deer only reads at sunset, when the sun runs along the surface and the shadow gives away a groove a fraction of an inch deep. Further west, in the Mongolian Altai, there is a place where the same theme is taken to its limit.
A continuous chronicle 12,000 years long lies on the rocks there. In 2011, it went onto the UNESCO list. Numbers are not the point. The images run one after another, layer by layer, without breaks, and whole epics can be followed on the same stone. The lowest layers are mammoths, ostriches, and hunters on foot with spears and drive traps. Above them, chariots. Higher still, riders, herds, wagons, and ownership marks on livestock. It is the same place and the same rocks, and you can watch glacial tundra turn into steppe over 12,000 years, then into dry steppe, while people change the way they live step by step. When the bottom tier was cut, writing did not exist anywhere on the planet. The past sorted into museums and labeled, "Looks different here." 12,000 years of history lie in the open air, on rocks you can walk up to, put your palm on, and touch a line cut by a person before writing existed. There is no display case.
In 1922, a strange caravan passed through these same lands, 75 camels and 5 cars. The man leading it was not looking for pictures on rocks in the Gobi. He was after something else. He was looking for the origin of humankind, and he was certain the answer was buried somewhere in the middle of Asia. His name was Roy Chapman Andrews. The American Museum of Natural History sent him into Central Asia in 1922. The expeditions ran through 25, and the task was stated plainly: find human ancestors deep inside the continent. The scientific fashion of the time placed the cradle of humanity in Asia. Andrews drove the cars over open ground while the camel caravan went ahead with fuel and provisions, laying down supply dumps along the route. He found no human ancestors. What the expedition did reach in 23 was a line of cliffs Andrews named the Flaming Cliffs. In Mongolian, the place is called Bayanzag.
It is a wall of red-orange sandstone 100 feet or so high, and at sunset, the rock glows as if it were lit from inside. Bone fragments crunch underfoot. They weather out of the slope on their own and spill down with the sand, so there is almost no searching to do. You only have to watch where you step. The eggs came out here. Elongated, about 6 inches long, with a rough shell, lying in a ring as if in a nest. Before that, the reproduction of dinosaurs could only be argued about. No egg had been reliably tied to a dinosaur, and the question stayed open. The find went around the newspapers of the world at once, and Andrews later described the expeditions in a book published in 1932. Beside one of the clutches, they found the skeleton of a small predatory dinosaur. The conclusion looked obvious. The animal had come for somebody else's eggs and died at the scene. They named it Oviraptor, egg thief.
Decades later, an embryo was found inside an egg of the same kind, and it turned out to be an embryo of the oviraptor itself, which means the clutch had belonged to it from the start. Judging by the pose, it was covering the eggs with its forelimbs, the way birds do. The name was never changed, and the species still carries a charge that has been dropped. Protoceratops alone came out of these cliffs in such numbers that the count ran to dozens of skeletons, and many of them lay whole, with the spine and skull intact. A whole skeleton is rare. Usually, an animal leaves a handful of bones dragged apart by water and scavengers across different layers. Here, the skeletons lie one after another as if something covered them where they stood, all at once and very fast. The layer these finds come out of is called the Jadokta Formation, and its material was described for decades by the Mongolian paleontologist Rinchen Barsbold. The sandstone here was once dunes,
Which raises the question that has been building all along. What has to happen to an animal for it to fossilize whole and in mid-movement? The answer was found in 1971 in sandstone of the same formation, a few dozen miles from the Flaming Cliffs. Joint Polish-Mongolian expeditions had been working in the Gobi since '63, with Zofia Kielin-Jaworowska leading the Polish side. They took skulls, clutches, and complete skeletons out of the desert. But what came up in '71 stands apart. Completely apart. 2 animals came out of the rock locked together. A velociraptor, a predator the size of a large dog, weighing something like 35 pounds. And a protoceratops, a plant eater with a heavy beak and a bony frill at the back of the skull, weighing close to 400 pounds, about as much as a large boar. The weight difference is tenfold. The pose survived completely. The sickle claw on the velociraptor's hind foot went into the throat area of the protoceratops, exactly where the large blood vessels in the windpipe run. The protoceratops's beak is closed on the predator's right forelimb and holds it in a death grip. Both of the velociraptor's front limbs push against the head of its prey. There is no artist's reconstruction here, and no hypothesis built from scattered bones. 2 skeletons lie exactly as the event caught them. And here is the part worth understanding. For 100 years, the velociraptor's sickle claw was written about as a knife for opening up the belly of its prey. Here, it ended up at the throat, in the one place where an opponent twice its weight loses the ability to fight back almost at once. The target was the neck. One find said more about the behavior of this predator than several decades of arguing about the shape of a bone and how it might have worked. The age of this scene is about 80 million years. Both were buried instantly, in seconds, or the pose would have come apart. Predators and scavengers would have dragged the bones off, and the ligaments would have rotted long before fossilization. The main version is a collapsing dune, a wall of dry sand coming down and covering everything at the foot of the slope. A second version has a sandstorm. There is still no exact answer, because the trace of the collapse itself reads poorly in the rock. The argument is open. Try to feel this in your body. Dry sand weighs around 100 pounds per cubic foot. It flows like water and packs into airways instantly, while more of it keeps coming from above. Two animals gripping each other had nowhere to go. A collapsing slope ended the fight. Today, this specimen holds the status of national treasure in Mongolia and leaves the country only on individual permits for exhibitions with a return. The law guards it hard.
Mongolian law has a second prohibition as well, far older than this one, and it attaches to a place that still cannot be entered. The territory is called Ich-Korik, which translates as the Great Taboo. These are the lands around Burkhan Khaldun Mountain in the Kentii Range, in the northeast of the country, away from the Gobi proper. The mountain has been held sacred since the 13th century. By tradition, Genghis Khan, who died in 1227, is buried there, and the burial place was concealed on purpose. Nothing was left on the surface. Then comes the part that makes this story unique. The zone was closed to outsiders and guarded generation after generation by people of a particular lineage for whom keeping the prohibition was an inherited duty. The ban held 8 centuries. Empires, borders, alphabets, and forms of government changed in that time, while a patch of ground stayed closed simply because that was decided in the 13th century.
The grave has not been found. Not once, by no expedition, by no ground survey, by nothing flown overhead. Mongolian law directly restricts search work in this zone, and a large part of society treats searching itself as desecration. In 2015, the mountain and the landscape around it went onto the UNESCO World Heritage List precisely as a sacred site, not as an archaeological monument. This is a place to stop. We are used to a closed territory, meaning a military site or radiation. The reason here is different, and it has held longer than any protection system states have invented. The question of whether the map of the Earth is finished gets an unexpected answer. There is a place on it that goes unstudied, not because nobody can, but because somebody decided not to touch it. 600 miles south, in the Gobi itself, the opposite is happening. It leaves in pieces. Bones lie almost on the surface here, weathering out of the slopes on their own, and the person with no education at all can find them if he simply knows where to look. Then the scheme starts. The skeleton is dug up at night, broken apart, papered as mineral samples, and shipped out through third countries. In 2012, a nearly complete skeleton of a Tarbosaurus, a large predator from the Mongolian Gobi, was put up for auction in New York and sold for more than $1 million. Mongolia went to court. The proceedings showed the skeleton had left the country illegally, and in 2013 it was returned to Ulaanbaatar. That is the one loud case with a return. How much is left quietly, nobody knows. Money is the smallest of the losses here. When poachers dig a skeleton out, everything that made it useful to science disappears with it. The layer it lay in, the pose, the orientation of the bones, the remains next to it, that is exactly the information that turns 2 skeletons from 71 into a scene of a fight. Without it, 2 piles of bones. At Bayanzag today, you can see pits and scattered shell fragments left by people who got there before the scientists. Come back to where we started. You thought the past had long been sorted, described, and shelved in museums. In the Gobi, it lies in the sand, and there is less of it every year. And not because of time or wind. For 80 million years, two animals held each other in sandstone, and nobody disturbed them. One bucket and one buyer were enough for a scene like that to stop existing as evidence and turn into an ornament in somebody's living room. Genghis Khan's grave was not found in 800 years. It may never be found. About the bones at Bayanzog, we will not even learn what exactly was lost, because only what people managed to describe was ever counted. Now a question for you. Mongolia has kept the zone around Burkhan Khaldun closed for almost 800 years and limits searching by law. What do you think? Should a place like that finally be studied with modern methods? Or is the ban itself, holding for 8 centuries, worth more than any find that could be made there? Write in the comments what feels right to you. If you want more breakdowns like this one, subscribe to the channel.